Are you a writer whose mind is a whirlwind of creativity and distraction? Hello, and welcome to Writing While Distracted, the writing podcast that helps you transform your scattered thoughts into literary brilliance. I'm Brenda Murphy, your NeuroSpicy writing coach. Stay tuned as we discuss character arcs, the next step in the revision process. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Brenda Murphy, your NeuroSpicy writing coach, and today I want to dive into a topic that often confuses new writers: the difference between character arcs and story arcs. I'm sure you've probably heard about story arcs and character arcs, and it's very easy to get the two mixed up. So I'm going to take a moment and just clear things up. First, story arcs and character arcs are not the same, even though you will hear people say that character is story. What they mean by that is the character's development is a huge part of your story. Whether your novel is character-driven or plot-driven, even in a plot-driven story, your character's changes over the course of the novel make it more readable and relatable. Your story arc is what happens overall, the sequence of events in your novel. It's the plot. It's how your characters deal with the plot that is the story arc. It's the what happens in your story, both in the environment around your character and what happens to your character. The character arc, on the other hand, is all about what happens to your characters as they navigate these changes, the internal changes. It's about their personal growth and development, their change. It could even be about their downfall, and that's a very popular literary trope, as the result of the story's events. So you've got two different arcs to think about, the story arc and the character arc. And both of these arcs need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And for a deeper dive into story arcs, I've got another podcast and an episode and actually a blog post too that are dedicated to that topic. And I'm going to link those into the show notes for you so you can have another reference. It can be a very complicated topic and one I think that trips up a lot of new writers, or writers that have a hard time keeping all of the threads together. And many neurodiverse authors are struggling to keep their storyline straight because many of us are pantsers, we're not big plotters, and having a firm idea of what those things are is going to help you develop a storyline and know that when you're going through your revisions, as you see things that you've put into your manuscript, does this fall under the story arc or does this fall under the character arc? And am I making it clear and showing my readers what's happening in the story as well as what's happening to my characters as a result of the events of the story? So here's the thing about character arcs. They're not limited to just your protagonist, your main character. If you have multiple characters in your story, each of them should have their own arc, especially if they're point of view characters. Even if it's a small change, having your characters in the story go through different changes makes it a richer story and a more readable one. We don't function in a vacuum. Nobody changes in a vacuum, and changes in your character often bring out changes in other people because that character is not acting as they did in the past. The character has now changed, and that is going to influence those people around them as they notice those changes. You don't want your other characters to feel like window dressing or just cardboard cutouts that you stuck in there, placeholders. I'm not saying that the guy who takes the change at the supermarket for whatever reason needs to have a full-on, well-developed character arc. I'm talking about those people that your character interacts with on a daily basis or on a routine basis should have some kind of an acknowledgement, and you should have some awareness of those other people in the story. And again, it doesn't have to be a dramatic change, but it can be part of what your character also notices, that other people interact with them differently because they are changing. Think back to books that you've loved. Everyone in those books is impacted by the events of the story in some way. Even if the story is told from a single point of view, you often get a glimpse into how other characters change through the narrative. And that's the kind of depth you want to bring to your own writing. To figure out how your character is going to change throughout your story, doing some background work is essential. I've got a free workbook on designing characters, which I'll link in the show notes. It's based on Deborah Dixon's Goal, Motivation, and Conflict and Eileen Cook's fantastic book, Build Better Characters. And both of these are great resources to help you flesh out your characters and make them real as possible. Because when your characters' actions make sense, your story resonates with more readers. There's nothing worse than a character who does something completely out of character without a good reason. Now, sometimes we love a surprising twist, like when the most selfish of characters suddenly sacrifices themselves for the group. But even then, we want to see hints of that change coming. It's those subtle, gradual changes that make a character and your story feel authentic and relatable. For neurodivergent writers, this process can be especially rich. Many of us have faced unique challenges throughout our lives, often from a young age, and those experiences can be a treasure trove for character development. We've often had to be more observant of the world around us, whether to survive, to mask, or to simply try and understand social cues. This heightened awareness can really help when creating characters who feel real and multidimensional. So lean into that. Take advantage of those skills. Now, let's talk about how to effectively show your character's change in the story. Because remember, we're going to show, not tell, because that's what makes a good book. We want to see what happens to the characters. And I use that word in that we want to have scenes that demonstrate a character's change and development. One of the first things you want to do is establish your character's starting point. That's the beginning of their character arc. Who are they at the beginning of their story? Now, don't info dump. Don't spill out a bunch of stuff and list every place they've ever gone to school and everything else in their lives up until that point. Show us who they are through their actions and their interactions. There's a great book called Save the Cat that explains how to do that, and I will link to that in the show notes as well. It gives examples from movies and screenwriting that show the scenes that filmmakers tuck into a film to show you where your character starts. And they do this with interactions with other characters, an elderly person, a child, or a random stranger. How they treat other people can reveal a lot about who they are as a person. The other part of looking at your character development and arc and a way to show who they are is the inciting incident, the thing that kicks your novel off. Now here, both the story arc is kicked off by this inciting incident, and your character's character arc is kicked off. But you're going to have those viewed through a different lens. There's the large action happening in the background, the thing that kicks everybody out of bed and off to great adventures, and the thing that shoves your character out the door and into their next stage of growth and development. How did your character get pulled into the story? Was it by chance, or did they seek it out? This event sets the story and the character arc in motion, and it progressively complicates their life with various obstacles. Watching and understanding how they deal with these obstacles and these challenges show us their growth or lack of growth. There are those books that show you how the character tragically never changes. And that counts as a character arc too. Even though it's a flat arc, there's no huge peak. They can just be the same-ish at the end of the book. They've acknowledged the events around them. It can be maddening for the other people expecting them to change. But when they go back to being their same old selves, that is still a part of your story. Oftentimes, you'll see this in side characters, not necessarily the main character, because part of telling a good story shows your character's growth over the length of the novel or a series. You can also stretch it out. How do you show those moments of crucial self-realization where the character becomes aware of how their actions are impacting their life? And that's key to showing their development. When your character finally gets or has some inkling of what's going on around them and the world around them and how their actions are impacting what is happening going forward, or how they're going to have to change to deal with what is now the current state of affairs at the midpoint of the story, that's the midpoint usually of their character development. Now, when you're looking at this, supporting characters play a vital role here. And again, how your character interacts with others shows a lot about who they are and how they're changing. If you're writing a romance, this is especially important. You want to show both characters realizing that they belong together. And it's how they react to that realization that drives your story forward. The climax of your story may not always align with your character's arc. Sometimes a character's big change happens at the very end of the story and after the main plot's resolution, when they take a moment to look back at their behavior. And I'm going to talk about the movie Backdraft for a moment. And spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, turn the podcast off and go watch it. But for those of you who A, are not ever going to watch it, and B, are just interested, stay tuned. In the movie Backdraft, the main character's development culminates when he honors his dying brother's request to keep a secret for the sake of the fire department. And that is a significant change and marks a decisive departure from who that character is at the beginning of the story and where he started. And it happens after his brother's death, which is a huge, huge point, and the resolution of all of the parts of the story. He now know who's been setting the fires. He knows who's responsible for all the arson. And he knows that his brother knew and was trying to solve it his own way at the very end and was unable to. And so without embarrassing the department. And so he carries on that part of his brother's legacy. So let's talk about a series where the culminating event may not happen until 3 books along or longer, depending on how long your series is. Stretching out your character's growth and development over the course of several novels can be challenging, but it is not impossible. And if you break those books up and think about your character's arc as starting in the beginning of the first book and not being solved or resolved until the end of the last book, then you can kind of plot out those changes as you go along. And it gives you much more room to show that development if you are into writing very long books. And I'm thinking here specifically of science fiction series and fantasy novels, where you have a great deal of time to show your character's change and development over the course of a series, because those books tend to be longer. So even if you're stretching your character's arc out over several books, you want to have some resolution in each book, so that not necessarily a new beginning, but a fresh challenge that's going to keep your readers hooked and turning the pages as they watch your character and observe your character changing over the course of the novel. And that's what makes you come back for the next part of the series. What's going to happen now? That's the first question. And 2, how is this character going to react to this big change during the series? So focus on those things that will get your readers hooked. You want them to come back. You want them to turn the page. You want them to say, oh my gosh, how are they going to react to this? And you want them to feel like they know your character well enough that they're surprised when your character does something that's a little different or something that they didn't expect. You want your character to be relatable, but not routine and boring. You don't want your character to be predictable, because that's when readers close the book and say, oh, I know exactly what they're going to do and how this is going to play out, or I'm not interested, or I'm not invested in this character. I've not finished books because I got to the middle of the book and I really didn't care what happened to any of the characters. And that's what will make me close a book faster than anything else. I have to feel like I'm invested in that character's growth and development and their character arc in order for me to continue reading a book. If I don't care about your characters, I'm not going to finish the book, because why would I? Why would I? You read books to read about people and events and what happens to those people during the events. So why would you keep reading if you didn't identify or relate to or were not curious about what was going to happen to that character? So you want to make sure that when you're revising, that you polish your characters. Go back and add in scenes and dialogues or even events that show your character's progression throughout the story. Make sure your characters make sense and that their actions are consistent with who you have shown them to be and that their development feels natural. There are two different kinds of character arc when you're thinking about revision. And when you're doing revision, you kind of need to be aware of this. There's a positive arc where the character starts off flawed and grows into a better version of themselves. And that's kind of a classic character arc. And you can think of Bilbo Baggins in the Hobbit, who goes from a quiet homebody to an adventurer. And you can also have a negative arc where a character starts off in a very good place and then descends into darkness and becomes the villain of the story and becomes a person that you never expected them to become because of events in the story. And you can have a flat arc where the character doesn't change much, but the story around them does. And their reluctance to change and their resistance is also a story. So you can think about those things when you go through the revision process and you're looking, one, you've done your story arc overall. So if you have your plot kind of sorted out in your mind and you fix that, and remember, I have a podcast that you can listen to talk about that. And now you're looking at your character arc. You're looking at how you're showing your characters fitting into those events. So if you think of them as nesting one inside the other, that can also give you sort of a mental model for how they fit together. And they don't have to exactly align, but they should be close because your character is changing because of events in the story. So get your story events nailed down first, and then look at your character development. How has that character changed because of events in your story? And again, I'm going to include a link in the show notes for a free PDF with 50 ways to show your character's arc and build that into your manuscript. And that resource will help you make sure that your character's development is clear and compelling. And there's a lot of ways to do it. It can be overwhelming or frustrating at first because if you are first starting out as a novelist, that's one of the finer points of it. And it's one of those things where if you don't get it right, again, people close the book. If your characters are not compelling, they close the book. They don't finish. Or if you're trying to get representation, they stop reading. So the challenge today is that there are so many people submitting and seeking representation or seeking publication. Or if you're an indie publisher, you have about 5 pages to capture your reader's attention. And you need to do that by showing a character in those first 5 pages that your readers are more intrigued to turn the next pages to find out what happens to them. It used to be, they said, the first 10 pages to hook your readers. It is down to 5 because that is a result of attention span, decrease in attention span that's been documented, and also just the plethora of available reading materials. They can just go to the next book. They're going to close it and go to the next book. Take your time, build characters that are compelling, and work to show how compelling they are in that first 5 pages. Before I wrap up, I want to touch on a crucial point of character development and character creation. And you need to look for this when you're doing revisions. Be careful of stereotypes when creating characters. And I touched on that in several blog posts and another podcast I have about character development. And again, I'll link to all of these resources in the show notes. Stereotypical writing, lazy stereotypical writing, does a disservice to your readers and your story. If you're writing characters outside of your own lived experience, please do the research. Hire sensitivity readers. Talk to people who've lived that life. Don't rely on stereotypes to fill out your novel. It is another way to ending up in the rejection pile because editors are not looking for stereotypes. Editors are looking for colorful, creative characters that are compelling, authentic, and nuanced characters. Creating authentic and nuanced characters is what makes a book relatable and memorable. Think back to those characters that you still carry with you from books that you've read, characters that you wish you could meet in real life, or those that you're really happy that you never have to. So take your time, use your tools, and keep your characters real. I've listed a bunch of resources in the show notes. Be sure to check those out. And until next time, keep writing and keep creating those amazing characters. And take some time during revision to make sure that your character's arc is front and center. Until next time, happy writing. Thanks for tuning in to Writing While Distracted, where we navigate the winding roads of creativity amidst the chaos of distraction. If you've enjoyed this podcast and found it useful, please share it and tag me, DM me, and let me know. Give us a like and a follow so you don't miss the next exciting podcast. Leave a review if you can. It really helps get the podcast in front of more people. Remember, in the dance between focus and diversion, every stumble is a step closer to mastering the art of writing. So join me next time as we continue to unravel the mysteries of the writer's mind. Until then, keep writing, keep wandering, and embrace the distractions that fuel your creativity. Stay tuned, stay inspired.